Welcome to the CFO Show. I'm your host, Melissa Howitson, CFO of Venice Solutions. Today, we continue another episode in our series on better business partnering. We will be focusing on the relationship between finance and the office of the CMO. This is a key relationship given marketing's role in helping to drive growth for the organization. And yet, it can sometimes be a strained one, with finance being so focused on the numbers, and yet marketing is a little more creative, and sometimes showing the ROI can be hard. Joining us today is Ruth Zive, CMO of LivePerson, where she's responsible for global marketing and helping to scale the organization. Ruth, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you so much for having me.
So Ruth, let's start off with a question about marketing. How do you define what marketing does in an organization?
Yeah, that's a big question, and I would say marketing isn't the same for all organizations. Keep in mind that I work for an enterprise-facing B2B SaaS organization, so that very much informs my perspective on the question. But I see two primary areas of responsibility. The first is to provide healthy pipeline coverage for sales. That's ultimately my job. Sales is very much my customer, and I need to provide them with what they need, the pipeline that they need to hit their revenue numbers. And then the second area of responsibility for marketing is really around brand building and brand awareness. And ultimately, that priority, that interest is in service of the first one. You know, brand awareness is really like air cover to your pipeline goals and interests. Because, you know, a well-recognized, well-respected brand is more likely to win deals. So that's how I think about my areas of responsibility as the head of marketing.
And I love how you define who a primary customer is for you, because I think that's so important as we think about each of our roles within the organization is who are our key stakeholders, who are our customers, be them outside the company or inside the company. So thank you for that. Now, can you tell us a bit more about what LivePerson does?
Sure. LivePerson is the enterprise leader in digital customer conversations. So what does that mean? We know that large businesses are scrambling to move away from legacy synchronous forms of communication like email and phone calls. We know that customers today want to interact on modern digital channels like web or text or social. But, you know, big brands don't know how to move from old to new. They really struggle in this transformation. And LivePerson solves that pain. We have the software, we have the playbook, we have the track record of doing just that. We facilitate and power these digital first conversations between brands and their customers.
Very cool. And what a hot space that is to be in right now.
Yeah, definitely.
I know we talk a lot on the show about finance and how the Office of Finance is needing to move more and more into being more of a strategic player within the organization and away from the tactical. And I think some of that same is happening for marketing. Can you tell me how you think about where marketing is needing to be more strategic within the organization?
Yeah, marketing needs to be a data-driven, data-informed function. And I think sometimes that's lost because there is, a healthy dose of artistry that's required to be an effective marketer. But the way I operate and the way I think high-functioning marketing teams operate inside of enterprise B2B SaaS is by using the data to drive momentum and outcomes. So I set stretch targets every quarter for all aspects of marketing across my team, but primarily those targets are oriented around pipeline for the reasons I explained. And then we measure progress against those goals in real time, and we course correct when we're not hitting our numbers. But it's really the data that drives our decision making inside of marketing, and I think that has to be foundational in order to operate in an effective way.
I love that focus on data that you mentioned, because similarly in finance, we talk about how we help support data-driven decisions for the rest of the business. So something that we both have in common. How have you seen finance offer the strongest value to marketing? Where have you seen that partnership be most productive?
I'd say it comes back to the data. I need that data to make smart decisions. So when I think about, for instance, the performance of my digital channels, if I'm thinking about social or email or SEO or pay-per-click, I'm always scrutinizing those channels with three considerations in mind. The first is the volume of leads that I'm driving through those channels. The next is the conversion rate of those leads to pipeline. And then the last piece of consideration is around the cost per lead within that channel. And finance owns a lot of that data. And I'm going to make my investments across those channels based on the performance along those three lines. So I very much lean on finance to help provide some of that data and to partner with me so that we can appropriately evaluate and then shift our investments based on those results. So, what is the ROI on my spend? And I've used channel spend as an example, but I'm thinking about that relative to all of my marketing investments.
And you talk about that partnership between the two. In your experience, what has been the best approach, or even organizationally, how have you structured in working with your finance business partner for optimal results?
So I've done it a variety of ways, but I think the best way is when there is sort of a designated finance business partner that is working with marketing, ideally somebody that has some baseline understanding of marketing. And then I have, marketing ops resources on my team, and somebody within that group is then partnering in lockstep with that finance business partner, meeting on a regular basis. This then bubbles up to me. I meet with that person's manager on the finance side on an every other week or once a month basis to make sure that we're in the know on everything our teams are discussing more frequently and more regularly. So really having that identified designated partnership between really two people. It's not to say that the rest of marketing doesn't have skin in the game on the finance front, but this is maybe a crude expression, but I like one throat to choke. I want to know who is owning that responsibility, and same thing on the finance side. So that's how I've structured it in the past.
And you talked about ideally having prior marketing experience, which is sometimes challenging. And even for us in finance, we often are trying to find the right balance of rotating business partners to help support different parts of the organization and bringing their experience with other leaders to bear when they move over to supporting a different part of the organization. And also, how do we get, if they've not had that prior marketing experience, how do we get them that first amount of experience in an expedited fashion so that they can be driving value? What are your thoughts on, one, does that offer you value when they've supported another part of the org previously? And if they haven't had that marketing experience before, some quick ways to help them be able to start adding value for you.
Yeah, I actually think it's less important that the finance business partner has, hands-on marketing experience. What I do think is critically important is that they respect marketing as the expert in the room on the marketing front. What's very frustrating is when the finance business partner is opinionated about marketing best practices and wants to sort of weigh in on how spend should be used, from a marketing perspective. I'm interested in financial metrics. And so, my team needs to be expert on how that translates into marketing activities. But I need the finance business partner to be able to surface those metrics in the ways that we need. So I actually, when I said it's great if they have baseline marketing experience, it's more so because that learning curve is a little bit swifter. But inside of a few meetings, understanding the fundamentals, that's on me, that's on marketing to unload and explain to finance in a way that's going to be constructive.
And so stepping away for just a minute, there's the importance of that relationship with the finance business partner with marketing, but there's also this relationship between the CMO and the CFO. And so what, in your experience, have been some of the strongest behaviors or traits that you've seen with some of the best CFOs you've worked with?
I love this question. So, I believe as an executive, a C-suite executive, that my primary responsibility is not actually to run a department. I have great marketing leaders who report to me, and I trust them to run the day-to-day within marketing. And my biggest responsibility is to drive forward the interests of the business. And my primary team along those lines is the executive team. So I think of the CFO along with the CRO or the COO or the CEO as my horizontal partners along those lines. We are locking arms to drive forward the interests of the business. And we each have our own respective areas of expertise, our own domains, but we should feel very comfortable crossing borders to influence what we're doing within our respective areas of expertise. So that's how I think of my relationship, zoomed out with the CFO. That said, the best relationships that I've had with CFOs have been with folks who are very data-driven, very operationally minded, very disciplined, very accountable, and hold me accountable to outcomes. That's how I operate. Willing to kind of dig in and understand the nuance so that we can build ROI models and marketing models that are credible and defensible, but not super opinionated about what great marketing looks like. Marketing is an interesting function insofar as everybody thinks they can do it, which is strange to me. Like, nobody really weighs in on engineering. But everybody, I think because marketing is something that impacts you so emotionally, everybody has an opinion about it. And the CMO and the marketing team, they need to be the experts in the room. So the best relationships with finance have been where, we're in locked arms against the strategy of the business and the interests of the business more broadly. We're meeting about those things regularly. And then finance is holding me accountable as an executive to the performance and outcomes that my team is delivering within marketing. That was a lot of words. I hope that answered the question.
No, that was great. And your observation, I've had the same one where I've seen that times. And I think you're right. You mentioned that emotional piece, because I have seen that where people weigh in on marketing, and HR is another one. I think that sometimes that happens where it's like at a certain point, hey, we have the experts here who really know. Let's let them lead and let's follow and support here. So love that you touched on that. Now, where in your experience have you seen some of the greatest tension between marketing and finance? Because I think sometimes we do get that tension that can come in because sometimes some of the things in marketing, we try to measure what we can, but sometimes you're having to take some chances and there's a little bit more art than science to some of it.
For sure. And even with the things that you can measure, there's a lot of nuance. So, I'll give you a practical example. We attribute based on a first touch. So in other words, I'm speaking marketing language, but when you want to understand where a lead or an opportunity has come from, you would look at a first touch attribution. So did it come through a pay-per-click ad? Did it come through an organic social post? Did it come through an event? And that gets captured in Salesforce. And a lot of or in your system of record. So a lot of the finance models and the ROI models depend on that first touch attribution because it's the easiest one to capture. Sometimes there's a first and last touch attribution, but the first touch is easiest to capture. But here's the thing, in a long enterprise sales cycle particularly, there are a dozen or more touches that take place before a deal even enters pipeline sometimes. You might have a BDR that is outbounding to a prospect. They don't respond, but then they see an ad. The ad doesn't really cause them to convert online, but it moves them to go to an event and learn more about the vendor. At the event, they convert, and it's just a very long, complicated, zigzaggy process. And usually a first touch attribution model doesn't take that into consideration. It's very, very hard to measure and capture with credibility. And finance doesn't always get that. And it's not just finance. Most other teams don't understand that nuance. So I think that, there's often a lot of tension along those lines. So yes, there's a whole world of marketing that is hard to measure, brand related activities, PR, those types of softer activities that are more about brand building. But even within the realm of things that you can measure, it's complicated. So I think that a good finance partner is one that understands that nuance and is open-minded to that nuance and can bring flexibility to the model to account for it.
And what would you say would be one area where finance could do a better job partnering with marketing?
Well, I think that's it. Putting streamlined processes in place, rigorous, credible models in place that hold us accountable, but also making room for some flexibility. I'll give you another example. We do a lot of events at LivePerson, and, there are all kinds of rules around getting POs approved through finance. But sometimes you can't have 60 or 90 days lead time in advance of an event. You book a venue and they want to be paid on a certain timeline, and that doesn't align to the finance rules. Like, you have to be flexible around some of these things. So I think I'm totally supportive of process and accountability and measurement. We need to do all of those things better, but there has to be a little bit of room for nuance and flexibility.
And I love that you highlight that need for that flexibility, because you're right. Sometimes we don't know what we don't know, and we think that what's there is working, and we know our why for why it's in place, but understanding what it might be doing on the other side and actually getting in the way of others being able to deliver their mandate is also an important piece of that. Can you maybe share with us one real life example that you've experienced where that relationship between finance and marketing ended up driving better outcomes for the business?
Yeah, I'll give an example that I would suspect is resonant for most of your listeners. The last few years in software have been riddled with rifts and reorgs and budget cuts. And, that's really, really hard. It's really hard for a whole host of reasons. And I think one way that finance has really helped is in, again, giving me the flexibility to determine how I shift resourcing on the programs front to maybe diminish headcount impact, and giving me the latitude, not just because I want to save people, although, that's always on my mind, but because sometimes, the real value comes from the contributions of the people that are on your team. And so helping me to really think that through. Where do we need people? Where do we need program spend? So that, a RIF isn't just always about headcount. You have to really be thinking about all of the different areas of opportunity to be more efficient and diminish your spend. And finance has really helped me to lead with that approach, so that we can build a really high-performing team, a scrappy, high-performing team that's delivering great outcomes, and doing that within the context of a, constrained economy and, constrained budget.
Yeah, and it's interesting that you mentioned that one, because I often talk with my team about, especially when you're looking at budgets, they start as numbers on paper and in a model, but then they have to turn into actionable, what is the business going to do? And at the end of the day, especially in a SaaS business, a lot of this is people, and there's cultural impacts, there's thrashing within the organization that can happen. And so we have to be really careful how we take what it starts as modeling and numbers, but needs to quickly translate into what's a great plan to execute. And I agree with you, being open-minded to that, so that we don't cause, actually, again, more damage than good, trying to make sure we fit within an envelope that happens to be the budget.
Yeah, and finance has for sure helped me make better decisions along those lines. I mean, when I've been in a situation where we've been outsourcing to a third-party agency, for instance, lots and lots of money coming, allocated within the marketing budget. And I had a strong opinion that bringing expertise in-house would be a lot more effective. And so, that's almost counterintuitive. You're going to hire when you're cutting budgets. But finance was very open-minded to this and trusted me, and we were able to radically cut the program's budget by bringing additional resources in-house. So, that sort of discussion, the open-mindedness of finance, the understanding that it's not just numbers in a model, that it's, people, and that there's nuance.
So let's switch over. We've touched a little bit on the data and a bit on metrics, but how do you think about metrics? Which ones matter most for you?
Yeah, I love the measurement of marketing. You mentioned that marketing is part art, part science. I talk about this a lot. I'm a writer by training, so I certainly understand the creative, artistic side of marketing, but I really love the science side of marketing. So the metrics matter to me. Everything ladders up to pipeline ultimately, which ladders up to revenue. So revenue is my starting point for all of the reports that I run and measure. And we look at pipeline both sourced. I look at, in quarter sourced pipeline. And then I also look at, in quarter, starting quarter qualified pipeline set to close. So that's your coverage really. So I'm looking at the former as a leading indicator of health and the latter as a lagging indicator of health. But then those two overarching reports and metrics trickle down to BDR meetings, MQLs, leads, website visits, all of those things sliced and diced in a myriad of ways. So those are the priority reports. On the brand front, or the art front, if you will, which I think, by the way, product marketing fits into the art bucket in a lot of ways because very much about messaging and positioning. We're looking at brand awareness. We're looking at branded keyword clicks. We're kind of trying to measure how is brand awareness growing. We're looking at social following, share of voice, those types of things, which don't directly connect to pipeline and revenue. But as I mentioned at the top of the discussion, I see very much as air cover for all of those pipeline metrics.
I love that you broke that into the art and the science pieces. One thing that you didn't touch on, I'd love to know what your thoughts are on, inputs or how you think about ROI, as well as one that is commonly talked about, which is customer acquisition costs.
Yeah, well, CAC is really important and finance should be measuring that. But I don't think at all that it's a marketing-owned metric or a marketing-only metric, at least not in enterprise B2B SaaS.
What about ROI and some of the inputs that you use there, as well as how you think about cost of acquisition of customers?
Okay, well, let's address CAC first. Really important metric. I think finance should be measuring that and tracking that, but it's not a marketing-owned metric. It's not a marketing-only metric, especially in enterprise B2B SaaS. There are a lot of different inputs to that measure. So it's not something that I personally track or measure as an indication of marketing success. I think it speaks to business health, and there are a whole bunch of reasons why it's important, but I don't see CAC as a marketing metric. On the ROI front, I use a pretty simple calculation, which is, pipeline or revenue relative to the cost over a time horizon. So how much are you spending, and then how much pipeline or revenue is that delivering? But even that calculation is fraught with complexity for the reasons I spoke to earlier, because we do this based on a first touch attribution. So, we assign the attribution to a certain channel. We can see the ROI of that channel based on the spend, but it's using only that first touch. And the ROI calculation completely overlooks, by design, by the way, but overlooks the measure of influence that marketing has. So marketing influences renewals. It influences existing pipeline, not just pipeline that hasn't yet been sourced. So I think we do track ROI. I do think it's a little bit of a crude calculation everywhere I've worked, by the way. This isn't a LivePerson thing. But I still think it's important as, a bit of a zoomed out perspective on how your investment is delivering.
And you touched a bit earlier on the topic of efficiencies, which is very much front and center, has been, for the last year, for sure, for companies. What are some of the key areas where you've been focused on driving efficiency and go-to-market?
Yeah, I think, and this is really where finance is key, making sure that my biggest bets are oriented around the things that I know are paying off. So, I scrutinize my investments and then I double down in the areas where there's clear return on that investment. And I very much depend, and that ensures much more efficient operation because you want you want your ROI to be as significant as possible. So you better be making those investments in the areas with the highest return. So that's the ultimate in terms of high efficiency within marketing. There's always room for new experiments and new activities, and a lot of hype around how AI and automation can drive that. We're doing some very cool experiments within marketing along those lines. I have lots of feelings about AI. And then also, you can become very bloated on the tech and software front. There are some amazing tools out there, but I always like to take a step back and just, evaluate the stack that we're using and determine what is really making people function more efficiently, driving better performance, driving better outcomes. If you can't draw those conclusions, then maybe you need to reevaluate your investment in that software.
And following on that topic of AI, LivePerson did recently release a report that was based on survey results that you did from business leaders. What do you think finance leaders should know from that in terms of how to think about their own investments in AI and technology stack?
It's a great question, and everybody should download this report. There are some super interesting findings, not the least of which is that consumers are much more tentative about AI than business leaders. There's a lot of energy and enthusiasm around the promise of AI, no doubt, but consumers really want assurances that their own experiences are not going to be diminished as a result of AI investments. So what does that mean to finance? I think finance needs to be mindful of this and make decisions and investments with the end user, the customer in mind, whether that end user is an internal employee or an external customer. You've got to meet them where they're at, and you want to make sure that the investment that you're making in AI is actually going to deliver the experience that your customers expect. So it's not a panacea. You really want to partner with a vendor that can show you the way, that has a track record. There's a lot of vendors out there right now claiming to solve the world's problems with AI, and a lot of them will be proven to be, I think, a flash in the pan. So choose wisely and make the customer front and center in your decision-making process so that you're actually bringing to them what they expect.
So one last question for you. What would be one thing that you would want finance people to know that you think they may not often know about marketing?
Well, this is something that they probably know, but I still think is a challenge in many respects. Marketing isn't just about brand. It's not just the art. And I think marketing is so often perceived as that. It's, how your website looks or what your tagline is or the color of your logo. And those things are important. I don't want to suggest that they're not important. But marketing is very much about science and math. And marketers, and I put myself in this category, care deeply about the science and the math. And so there's an opportunity for finance to really partner in measurable ways that I think will drive marketing forward and hold marketing accountable a little bit differently. And I think that, there is often this knee-jerk assumption that marketing is, it's really about brand. And it is, but that's not all it is.
Such valuable advice. Thank you so much, Ruth, for sharing all of your insight and experiences with us today. You also have a podcast, so can you help our listeners understand where we might be able to hear more from you?
Yeah, absolutely. I host a podcast called Generation AI. You can get it wherever you listen to your podcasts. and we talk with experts in AI from all different parts of the business with all different types of perspective, trying to really distill it down so that our listeners can understand the real world impact of this technology and how it's likely to touch them in their lives.
So Ruth, given that you have a podcast, I'd love to ask you another question. What would be advice for another host that you would give?
Yeah, well, you're doing a great job. You should be giving the advice, but I would just say, have fun with it. Definitely be prepared. I never want to go into a podcast blind, so to speak. Like I want to understand the interests of my guests and their background. So you want to be prepared, but you also just want to have fun with it. It's a great medium, a great way to get to know people, a great way to learn. So just be yourself and have fun.
Well, thank you for that. And what would be some of your favorite podcasts?
Well, my entry into the world of podcasts was through an obsession with How I Built This. Guy Raz is the host, and it just, every business that I've admired, every startup, I just love hearing those origin stories. They're so fascinating. I haven't actually listened for a while, but there was a period of time where that was my obsession and really where I became hooked on podcasting as a medium. More recently, I listened to Barry Weiss and Honestly with the Free Press, and she's just a brilliant journalist and a great podcaster and answers all of my questions about the world, especially in light of all of the craziness in the world right now. So I'd encourage everyone to check that out.
Now, whenever we have a guest on the show, we do have 2 rapid fire questions that we like to ask them. So are you ready?
Sure.
All right. The first one is, what is the best piece of business or leadership advice that you've ever received?
Well, I've been lucky that I've received a lot of great advice. But one that comes to mind is to always hire people that are smarter than you. And I'm really lucky that I have a team of people that are way smarter than me. It's how I've been able, I think, to grow my career, is recognizing that by putting somebody in a role, somebody that's more expert than I am, that allows me to step back and take on different strategic perspective across a broader business. So I have some super smart people on my team. And I think that was great advice. Don't be scared about hiring somebody who can do it better than you can.
And what about a book that's had the greatest impact on you?
So many great books that I've read, but I'm going to point to one that's been on my mind lately, the book Amp It Up by Frank Slootman. There's one notion in the book that I just find myself coming back to over and over again, and that's that execution. I'm probably butchering this. I'm not saying it the way that he reflected it in the book, but execution trumps strategy every day of the week. A brilliant strategy that doesn't get executed against is a failure, but a scrappy execution in the absence of a strategy is still a success. So I will always over-index on execution over strategy.
I think you did a great job summarizing that. So I definitely want to read that book now. Thanks again for joining me today. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you so much. This was great.
If you'd like to learn more about today's topic, please see the links in the show notes. And we would love to hear from you, our audience. Please leave us a review on any of the streaming platforms. We always love to hear your feedback, and it helps other listeners to find the show. Remember to subscribe wherever you listen to or watch your podcasts. You don't want to miss an episode. For the CFO Show, I'm your host, Melissa Howitson. Until next time.